It's kind of wild when you really think about it, but there's this huge misconception going around that America's on the decline. It's like every time you scroll through social media or check the news, you see people talking about how America is just falling apart. They say things like America's done for, America is in its final stages, or America is about to collapse any day now. And honestly, if you don't stop to think about it for a second, it might actually start to sound convincing. Like, well, maybe they're right, but I'm here to tell you, that's just not the case. It's all because China's been growing at such an insane rate. I mean, China's been leveling up, and it's hard not to notice. But here's the thing, this has led to a lot of what I call survivorship bias. Basically, people in China are feeling like they're on top of the world now, so they assume that America's totally slipping. But that's just not reality. Actually, if you take a step back and look at the facts, you'll see that America is still standing tall, and in fact, it's probably going to remain untouchable for the next 3 decades. So if you're one of those people who's been buying into the America's crumbling narrative, let me walk you through a few key areas where America is still absolutely crushing it. I mean, this is really important stuff. If we start underestimating America strategically, it could be a huge mistake. Let's look at the first area, the economy. Look, the numbers don't lie. If you take China out of the equation, America's economic power is actually beyond what most people can even comprehend. According to official data, in 2023, the global GDP hit $105.44 trillion. The United States alone was responsible for a massive $27.36 trillion of that total. Now, if you subtract China's $17.79 trillion GDP, that means America's economy is still a third of the entire global economy. Let that sink in. It's not just China and the US at the top. The combined GDP of countries like Japan, Germany, and France is still far behind the US. In fact, it's even lower than the total GDP of Europe's 45 countries. And here's the kicker. The US population only makes up about 5% of the world's total. Think about that. But wait, it gets even crazier. A lot of the major corporations and financial players in places like Europe, Japan, and Korea, guess what? A lot of the major shareholders in those companies are Americans. So, if you really look at the numbers, America's economic influence is even bigger than what you see on paper. To put it simply, America's economic dominance is not just about its own GDP, it's about the global system. And the US is still at the helm of that system. Don't just take my word for it. Look at the global GDP rankings or check out Olympic medal counts over the years. You'll see the same thing. America is still in charge. Now let's talk military. So, in 2023, global military spending hit $2.44 trillion. But here's the thing. America is far and away the biggest spender. U.S. military spending in 2023 was $916 billion. And when you subtract China's $296 billion, it means America is still responsible for around 42.7% of the world's total military spending. That's almost half of the entire planet's military budget. To put it in perspective, if you add up the military spending of the top 10 countries, it still doesn't even come close to what the US spends. Even Russia, which we all know is a pretty powerful military player, spends only about a ninth of what the US spends. I know some of you might be thinking, yeah, but the US military has a lot of waste, right? Like I've heard of $9,000 for a bag of screws. And sure, yes, some of that stuff is a bit ridiculous. But when you look at the big picture, the actual capabilities are undeniable. For example, the US Navy has a total tonnage of about 557.6 million tons, and it has 11 aircraft carriers. That's more than anyone else in the world. These carriers are huge. Each one weighs about 100,000 tons. That's massive. Countries like the UK and France may have a couple of carriers, but they're nowhere near the size or capability of America's. Now, in 2001, China's total naval tonnage was about 320,000 tons, just a fraction of what the US had. Fast forward to today, and China has caught up to 2.9 million tons. But even with China's growth, the US Navy is still light years ahead. What does this mean? It means that, despite all the noise about China's military rise, the US military is still in a league of its own. And trust me, that's not something anyone should underestimate. Next up, technology. The US has been at the forefront of technological innovation for decades, and that's not about to change anytime soon. There's this guy in China, Xi Gong, he's a scientist, and he's been saying for years that America's scientific capabilities are way beyond what people think. He's right. The US has always been the leader in tech, and the truth is, it's not just about the past. We're talking about the future. I mean, America still has the most top universities and research institutions in the world, and the breakthroughs that come out of these places are shaping the future. You think about fields like computer science, biotechnology, aerospace, nuclear energy, the US is still ahead in all of them. And then there are companies like Google, Microsoft, Qualcomm, Apple, Amazon. These are the giants of the tech world. I mean, just imagine if you took China out of the picture. These companies pretty much dominate the global market. And speaking of dominating, just look at the Nobel Prizes. The US has been winning way more than any other country, year after year. In fact, over the past 5 years, the US has taken home more Nobel Science Prizes than every other country combined. And that's not a fluke, it's been happening for decades. The US is still investing huge amounts into R&D. We're talking $1 trillion this year alone, which is actually more than the military budget. And why? Because America knows that as long as it stays ahead in science and tech, it will maintain its power, both economically and militarily. Now, I know China's been growing fast, and that's definitely shaken things up. But here's the thing. China's technological growth has been incredible, and I think a lot of people underestimate just how far they've come. But here's the key. China's progress has come in part because they've had to play catch-up, and they've learned from the best. In a lot of ways, China's rise is actually a testament to America's leadership in science and technology. Without America, China wouldn't have made the strides it's made. In fact, the rapid pace of China's rise is probably what's been making a lot of people think that the US is on the decline. But actually, it's not about America losing ground, it's about China catching up. America is still the leader, and it's going to stay that way for a long time. So, when you see people talking about America's collapse, just remember, it's not that America's falling apart. It's that the rest of the world is finally catching up. And that's a good thing. It creates competition, it drives innovation, and it makes the world a better place. But let's be clear, if you think America's in trouble, think again. It's not going anywhere. And if you really stop and look at the facts, you'll see that it's not even close. America is still the giant in the room. All right, that's my 2 cents. Hopefully, that clears up any confusion. Keep your eyes on the facts, and you'll see that America is still the strongest force in the world. It's not going anywhere anytime soon.